some potential areas for priority research. With that, Gordon and Scott, you are welcome to take this on.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, and it's really an honor to be asked to give this keynote with my colleague, Scott Goodman. So we kind of have another title for this talk, which is The Eastern Bering Sea Crab Fishery Disasters, A Tale of Two Crab. Oop, one too many. There we go. Okay, so actually Matt gave a nice outline of what we're going to be doing. I'll be covering a bit of information about these declines and explore potential mechanisms and what might be in the future. And then Scott will highlight some of the commercial fishing industry impacts and review some of the BSFRF cooperative research and outlook into the future for future needed research. I'd like to begin with red king crab. This figure highlights the fishery removals of red king crab since early inception of the fishery in 1953 as a foreign fishery. The red hashed portion of the curve is the foreign fishery. This blue pattern is the directed commercial fishery landings. And then other areas that are very hard to see because they're relatively small are other sources of mortality on red king crab. Since its inception, this has been a very volatile fishery. You can see it peaked at 130 million pounds in 1980 and quickly declined, and we had closure already just 3 years later in 1983 because of concerns of conservation. We had subsequent closures in 94 and 95, and now most recently this last year and this current year. I'd like to reflect a little bit on what happened last time king crab declined in the mid-90s. At that time, there were many conservation concerns. There were concerns about the decline in the stocks, concerns that harvest rates were too high, that handling mortality occurred, but we had no idea how high it was, and concerns about trawl fisheries, both in terms of bycatch and their effects on habitat. So we did a lot of work on those areas, handling mortality, stock assessment, and harvest rates with a great team at ADF&G. I'd like to just highlight the actions that were taken based on all that work. And first, it was kind of a two-pronged attack, starting with the Alaska Board of Fisheries, where we were able to put into place stair-step harvest rate strategies that were much more conservative than the higher harvest rates that were being applied up to that point. And they included fishery thresholds, which are the point below which no fishing occurs at all, and that's where we are now. At the federal side, we were able to include handling mortality in the catch specifications. That is, we wanted to have a full accounting of all fishing-related mortality, not just the crab that show up at the dock. A portion of Bristol Bay called Zone 1 was prescribed prohibited species caps on crab catches by trawl fisheries, and after which, when those were hit, the area would close. A red king crab savings area was put into place to basically take care of mature crab and their habitats and afford protections. And then finally, there was a nearshore Bristol Bay trawl closure to protect juvenile crab. So this is another graph of the catch information. On the left y-axis is the green foreign harvest, the red domestic harvest, and then on the right y-axis is legal abundance. And I'd like to show you what happened once these actions were taken. I think you could see it was generally a favorable response. Whether it was cause and effect, maybe debatable, but it appeared that these actions had some positive effect on the stock and in fact helped rebuild it. Of course, you all know where we are now. Well, not to jump ahead. One of the reasons for this is recruitment. We had improvements in recruitment, males above, females below. And I think it's a little subtle, but I think you can probably see that there were some slight increases in recruitment that helped build the stock, and when coupled to reduced harvest rates, were able to help us get to recovery. So I think you all know where we are today. We have very low abundance of red king crab. This here is a graph showing the black dots are area swept trawl estimates of abundance, and the bars indicate confidence levels. And the curvilinear black line is the model-based stock assessment. And after the promise that we had after implementing those measures in the 90s, we've now gone through a couple decades of decline, so things are not doing very well. What are the prospects for the future? Well, one more I wanted to cover, and reflecting on recruitment in the last 2 decades, and really it was only 2010 was the last time we had a year class that was even slightly above average. So we've had failure at the recruitment level to sustain this stock. Looking ahead to the future, this is a stock recruit relationship that Ji Zhang and I updated in 2003. The y-axis is total recruits, and the x-axis is a measure of stock. We called it effective spawning biomass. And this is suggestive that intermediate levels of stock size produce very variable recruitments, but they're most likely to produce some very large ones that can sustain the fisheries. Unfortunately, this hasn't been updated recently, but I do have the value of effective spawning biomass for this last assessment, and unfortunately it's in this cluster of points that unfortunately look rather not very promising for the future. There was a nice study done by Cody Zawalski and colleagues published in 2021 where they were interested in looking at environmental relationships with 3 species of crab, red king crab, snow crab, tanner crab, and understanding those relationships from a statistical modeling standpoint, projecting those forward under global climate change models. So let's look at the red king crab results from that study. So they looked at environmental variables, and they found that the centers of abundance, or the centroids, tended to move east and north when water temperatures warmed and under scenarios with fewer cod. And these were driven by changes in bottom temperature that affected the longitude of red king crab and ice cover that affected the latitude. They did find that red king crab recruitment showed a slight increase with less ice cover and higher Arctic oscillations, but that was not statistically significant, so it remains to be seen whether that will actually translate into increased abundance and productivity and recruitment in the future. So that's kind of a snapshot of the recruitment situation for red king crab. There are other areas of interest and concern, particularly bycatch and habitat. I mentioned that there is accounting of handling mortality in the total estimates of fishing mortality. Back in the 90s, we did quite a bit of work on gear designs, trying to develop more selective gears that didn't catch the crab in the first place. And we did studies that tried to understand the handling mortality under different situations. But frankly, there's still a lot of scope for research in gear and bycatch handling mortality rates. I mentioned this red king crab savings area that was closed to bottom trawling, but it is open to pelagic trawls that are used to fish pollock, even if those trawls are fished on the seafloor. And the concern here is that trawling on the seafloor in these areas can have negative effects on the biologically structured habitats that are important for crab, and they could lead to unobserved fishing mortality. And by unobserved fishing mortality, this would be crabs that encounter the trawl foot rope but go under it and are not captured by the cod end, or crabs that go over the trawl foot rope and through the very, very large mesh, and again, not into the cod end to be observed by the observer a couple hours later when the haul is retrieved. I'm going to show 2 figures that come from a recent discussion paper. This is an estimate of the swept area by the pollock trawl fishery. It's for the pollock A season, which is January to May. And while there's concern about trawl impacts on crab any time of year, they're heightened when the crab are molting, which males do first in late winter, and then the females in the spring, and when mating also occurs. So this is the trawl footprint, and I'll point out this red box, which is the red king crab savings area. If we look at a time series of the swept area, the top section of this graph is statistical area T, which is the red king crab management area. And you can see there's a lot of variability over the years and through the seasons according to the seasonality of this fishery. I next want to highlight the third row, which is the footprint in the red king crab savings area, and particularly highlight the increase that has occurred in recent years. Okay, so that's the red king crab story. I'd like to now move to snow crab and particularly highlight these black bars, which are harvests. And you can see that as the fishery built up, it also became very volatile. We had a peak of 328 million pounds landed in 1991. And after more volatility, this stock was actually declared overfished in 1999. It subsequently recovered, and we had some more variability, but ending here last year with a quota of 5.5 million pounds. And of course, this year, the fisheries closed for the first time. What happened in 2018 to 2021 was that there was a decline of an estimated 10 billion snow crab from the eastern Bering Sea. The 2021 survey found the fewest snow crab ever in the history of the survey, and that shocking decline had occurred just 3 years after snow crab abundance was at historical highs. Up here you see the abundance estimate for males, and you can see this sharp decline here in the last few years. The graph for females looks very similar. I'd like to take a quick look at the size, frequency, composition of snow crab from 1980 to 2002. So what we see are different cohorts entering the stock and moving through the fishery. The largest recruitment ever observed was in 2015. This is a huge pseudo cohort that declined by half in just 2018 to 2019. And as I think you see, the very upmost line is pretty flat. Unfortunately, pretty much crab of both sexes and all sizes were lost from the system. So what happened? Let's take a look at some of the ideas out there. First is, did they move? Did they move to the northern Bering Sea? Well, the National Marine Fisheries Service did surveys in the northern Bering Sea, and of course they did find some snow crab there, but they were not in any numbers or the sizes that could possibly explain the losses from the eastern Bering Sea region. Females, as another example, were not aggregated near that survey boundary between eastern and northern Bering Sea, but they also suffered the same decline. So it doesn't appear that crab moving into the northern Bering Sea is a plausible answer. Did they move into Russia? This graph on the lower left shows centroids of the Russian snow crab fishery by year. And this comes from a paper by Chernyenko in 2021. And Mark Stickert and Ben Daly translated this location onto a map from our side of the line, where the blue circles show the distribution of the fishery and the red circles show the catches of crab in the survey. And in any case, the Russians reported a decline in CPUE in 2020, so it doesn't seem plausible that billions of crab moved in their waters. However, I'd like to point out that Connie Malovidov has a poster. She did some pilot study tagging of snow crab in an broad area west of St. Matthew Island, and she found 2 out of 48 tagged crabs, in fact, appeared to have moved in Russian waters. So perhaps this story could use a little more research. Did they move off the shelf and down the slope? That would be along this margin here. I guess I pointed out the blue circles show the catches from the 2020-2021 fishery, and the purple circles show the catches of 4-inch or very large industry-preferred size snow crab indicated by the NIMS trawl survey. And while the fishery impinges on the shelf edge in some locations, all these large 4-inch males are nowhere near it. So again, not suggesting mass movement off the shelf. Did we catch them? Here's a graph showing exploitation rates for both mature male biomass and large 4-inch males. And certainly there were years recently when catches were higher than would have been intended, and this is owing to uncertainty in the snow crab assessment model to correctly estimate abundance in the terminal or final year. But so now with more information as the years have gone by, we realized those were too high. But those catches did not approach the overfishing levels set for this stock. Here's another graph showing the removals. This is in millions of pounds by year. The blue bars show the removals from the snow crab fishery itself. The yellow portion of the bars show estimated dead crab from handling in that fishery. And all the other bars that you could probably not see because they're so small include estimates of dead crab from Tanner and red king crab fisheries and groundfish trawl fisheries. And in any case, all the removals are well below the green line, which is the overfishing level for this stock. What about environmental causes? Ocean acidification is often suggested. This is some work from Darren Pilcher using the Regional Ocean Modeling System. And those results suggest that there's corrosive waters on the shelf, a central and outer shelf. But these levels don't approach those that are generally considered to affect snow crab. There's been laboratory work in Kodiak and found that snow crab are actually pretty robust to OA. So the consensus is that these levels are not of concern at this time. What about dissolved oxygen? I'm now living in Oregon. We have dead hypoxic zones of Dungeness crab. Could that have occurred up here? This again is from Rom's modeling work from Darren Pilcher. And you can see there's certainly lower DO values on the central and outer coast, but they don't approach hypoxic levels that would cause mortality. So again, while these values require validation, the thinking is at this time that dissolved oxygen is probably not the problem either. Predation is often brought up. Their prime predator is Pacific cod. And in the northern Bering Sea, recently cod have shifted their diet from pollock to crab. Also, the spatial overlap between cod and crab has increased in recent years from 43 to 88%. And we also see from this graph from Kiram Iden that consumption of snow crab has increased recently, but that's also consistent with that big bulge of crab that came into the population. So we have to bear in mind that these consumption is a function of the number of cod and the number of crab in the system. Also bear in mind that cod consume almost exclusively small crab, 30 millimeter carapace width and less. And so that couldn't explain the loss of larger crab. Another issue is what's called bitter crab syndrome. It's a parasitic dinoflagellate called hematodinium that when affecting the crab will kill them. They will die 100% from that infection. This was kindly shared with me by Aaron Fedowa. It shows the prevalence of this hematodinium in Tanner crab on the left, snow crab on the right, for 3 different years and 3 different sampling locations per species. And while older data from the 80s and 90s suggests pretty low rates of prevalence in the Bering Sea, some of these values are definitely of concern, and anytime you see prevalence of 40% or more, this could definitely have population level effects. So for more on this, check out Aaron Fedowa's talk on Wednesday to get all the details. So, putting all the pieces together, Cody Zawalski and colleagues have a paper in review where they developed an integrated population model to estimate mortality over time of snow crab in eastern Bering Sea. They then performed generalized additive models and tried to relate the variation in mortality to these potential stressors. And the covariates they looked at were temperature, predation, disease, cannibalism, fisheries, and crab density. These models were able to explain a rather high fraction of the variability in mortality of both immature and mature crab. And their findings don't support the roles of trawling, cannibalism, disease, or predation in snow crab mortality. But higher temperatures and higher densities of mature crab were significantly associated with higher mortality for both groups of crab. A few more tidbits of information. They found that the weight of a 75 millimeter crab was 15% lighter in 2018 and 2017, perhaps indicating some kind of a food issue. And the spatial footprint of this stock is shown here for 2018, highlighted by areas in red and yellow where they're most abundant. No crab exist in areas that are shaded gray. So this was the tightest spatial footprint ever observed for this stock. Finally, the researchers noted that the caloric requirements of snow crab double if you change temperature from just 0 to 3 degrees in the laboratory. So the mechanism that they proposed was the combination of very large biomass, high temperatures, and small spatial footprint led to a quadrupling of the caloric requirements of this stock, leading to mass starvation. So that is their leading proposition. Getting back to Zawalski and Edel's work on global climate change and what that means for stocks, these are the results for snow crab. So the centroids, or centers of abundance, move north with warming sea surface temperature and west with warming bottom temperature. And the productivity or recruitment of snow crab was negatively related to the Arctic oscillation and positively related to ice cover. This is an Arctic species. Finally, snow crab recruitment is projected to decrease in the future as the population continues to contract northward. So I'm going to leave it there. I would like to thank all the colleagues who shared the information, without which I'd probably have very little to say. And special thanks go out to Cody, Aaron, and Ben for lots of helpful information. And I'll leave this slide up here and encourage you, if this area is of interest, check out these 2 posters tomorrow evening and these 5 talks on Wednesday to find out lots more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, AMSS, for the invite to come and share a little bit more from the industry perspective and from a collaborative crab research perspective on kind of the reality for crab right now in the Bering Sea. I'll keep rolling through relatively quickly, but my name is Scott Goodman. I'm the Executive Director to BSFRF. I'll share a little bit about who we are and how we came to be and what we do and how we're trying to help right now with the reality. So part of our reality is to figure a strategy to survive basically right now through crisis management, and it's kind of complicated. There's a few of us in the industry that have been working to kind of put this into 3 boxes or categories about financial relief. How do we get to a place where we can survive through? The system right now in terms of management is fairly rigid. It's co-managed between the state and the feds. It's in a catch share program, crab rationalization. There's Board of Fish activity on the state's oversight. There's council activity on the federal oversight. So getting to a place where we have even the ability to make some tweaks or changes is challenging. I'll come back to that. What I'd really like to focus more on is BSFRF's role through part of our strategic work, but more of our recent work, which is to have some urgent research, if there is such a thing, to try and help right now. We know that science goes slow, but we're trying to do our best here. So I wanted to bring these up a little bit just to kind of give a little different flavor on the reality. These are similar to a couple of the charts that Gordon showed, but one for red king crab, first of all, can give this context that this doesn't happen very often. It's been 25 years since there's been a season closure for Bristol Bay red king crab. This is our big, iconic crab for Alaska. Everybody's most likely familiar with it all around the world from the Deadliest Catch. These are the big guys that people take pictures of. This 2-year closure from the last 2 seasons is substantial, and those 2 big red arrows highlight that it hasn't been since 1994 and 5 that this last closure occurred. This chart shows you very briefly, the blue bars are the volume in millions of pounds. Gordon noted that that far left high bar axis just gets up to about 130 million pounds of crab. And since then, we've been much lower in relative terms. The red line shows you the value. This is a very lucrative fishery. It's a high unit value. Recent unit prices have been around $10 a pound or more at the ex-vessel level. Okay, same glimpse here for snow crab. This is the one that's more of a shock concern in terms of the reality of a big collapse. So same kind of a chart here. This one has a long domestic fishery. that with no season closures ever until now. You can see that this fishery back in the early 90s was over 300 million pounds a couple of years. Dropped down pretty substantially and then came back up for a year or two, and then has come down substantially into kind of this much lower relative volume. It looks like in 2011-12 it approached 100 million pounds. I think that was a 90 million pound tack right in here. And you can see that this is a pretty high unit value stock also, not as high as red king crab, but this gives you an idea of, you know, a first ever occurrence for snow crab. What does this mean, and how is the crab industry reeling from this? Just some very brief remarks about the economic impacts and to kind of put them in perspective. The ex-vessel value losses, that's when crab are landed, are estimated to be approaching $300 million. When you add in the processors, the losses are substantially higher. The reality in Alaska is the major plants that process crab are closing. The reality at the community level, impacts are extreme. Entire fleets are tied up. Options are limited because of this fishery being a catch share program. I think Gordon noted in his slide or two on these two stocks that it's about 60 or 70 boats right now in the most recent fisheries for snow crab, and it's about 50 to 60 boats for the recent fisheries for Bristol Bay. Loss of jobs and livelihood trickles through. It's impacting families and livelihoods in the industry. It's notable that during COVID, market prices and market forces rose, and since this three fishery closure here, 2 for red king crab and 1 for snow crab, there's been a substantial weakening after COVID period highs. So combining all of these factors together, really this is something that probably is around $1 billion or more of loss, which paints a bleak outlook for the industry, and really any strategy to get through and to find ways to help here, complicated. So just a little bit more here on this three-pronged approach. There's disaster relief funds that are coming to harvesters, processors, the CDQ groups, and communities, and some for research. It's slow. Typically, there have been substantial efforts to expedite it. We're thankful for that. On management, as I noted here, we're really not considering or talking about anything that would be a compromise to sustainability. We would hold that as a high priority, where we're not doing anything to fish the stock down further. Really, this is about considering ways to build in flexibility, new options, and somehow modifying the current system to adjust as necessary, and really to get a relatively small ability to open fisheries in the short term, if possible. So for the rest of what I'd like to focus on, I want to talk about some of the things that we're prioritizing as faster paced research that can try and help right now. We are continuing to build these in with our larger strategy, working on collaborating more with our normal group of people. Stakeholder input is very high priority for us. We're unique in that we're a research foundation directly funded by the fishermen, and we take advantage of that as much as we can to do urgent research. So about BSFRF, very briefly, we are a nonprofit research group, been around about 20 years. It's directly funded by voluntary support from both the harvesters and processors and others. Our general plan is to do about $1 million of research a year and to hold about $1 million in reserve. Last couple of years, that's been substantially different as we face the new reality. Collaborating on our projects, we work really closely with NOAA and ADF&G folks and others, very close. And to build our stakeholder input into the research while we stay focused on science and avoid advocacy. Very briefly, our mission basically and our goal basically are to work in a productive manner with everybody on research, and our hope is that improving the science to inform management will help improve sustainability. We've had a lot of focus in the past, just a couple of quick placeholders on how to scale the NOAA summer survey crab-related results. So we've got a lot of energy and effort that we've put into crab-specific surveys over our existence. These are a quick few snapshots of some ADF&G and NOAA people on board during our science parties, measuring and sampling crab. Most of our research, including that on the survey side, has been focused on trying to build information and fill gaps that would feed directly into the assessments. Another of our multiple year approaches has been to come up with helping understand how crab grow. Growth per molt, they're not a linear growth, they grow in a stepwise fashion. So going out and capturing animals that are just about to molt, like you see in the bottom right-hand panel, and holding those a little bit tricky, either in the lab or in the field, or a combination of the two, but getting them so that we can measure that growth per molt. Our current focus, just a few of these things here. There's like 6 or 7 things here. One of them, of course, is to communicate with stakeholders and try and help folks understand what's going on. It's very complicated and it's pretty difficult when we face something like a huge collapse from an all-time high to an all-time low in just a couple of years. So stakeholder workshops are pretty important. I'm going to touch base on the yellow ones here. Crab movement and tagging research is a continued area of focus. New crab survey research, I'll speak briefly about one that we've got where we're hoping to have a couple of boats in the water in about 60 days. Gordon noted a few of these other ones, but they're on our radar here as habitat and recruitment research. Recruitment for crab has always been a difficult issue. Bycatch research right now with fisheries closed is an important area to understand as much as we can for conservation management. And of course, there may be natural processes like crab predation that are underlying a lot of this stuff, as well as climate-related impacts. The bottom one here, new research support, CDS. We're very thankful for a couple of other efforts that are a little bit new and different for us, but I want to touch on that one too. So one of our big and most recent areas has been to focus on movement. I borrowed this one from Dr. Zacher with NOAA. It's our approach to work on seasonal movement of king crabs in Bristol Bay in a collaborative manner with NOAA and ADF&G folks. And Gordon gave a good overview. I just wanted to quickly put this there as a map placeholder. Bristol Bay is an area of inner and outer Bristol Bay that red king crab exist in. There's a couple of management protective measures that are in place, and part of our movement and tagging and distribution work is to help context here to understand, do we have this right? Do we need to rethink it? Is there a refinement to some of these areas, maybe more or less, or maybe we're missing some important things right now while stocks are in a stressed spot? The tagging and movement work, this has been part of a multi-year $3+ million project for Bristol Bay red king crab. This is about actually capturing crab, putting tags on crab and releasing them. The first approach here was with a tech that was acoustic tags, and then letting the crab go with a very tiny, relatively small tag that pinged, sent an acoustic signal at intervals, and then we would go over the top with a sail drone in a remote monitoring fashion, kind of mowing the lawn over the crab to try and relocate them at a later time. So that was our first approach. Later, we moved to more microsatellite tags. We had some very strong successes with the acoustic tag and the sail drone work, and then some difficulties that kind of came up in the middle of COVID. So we've got a lot of work that's been focused on the new tags, which are the satellite ones. 4 years of red king crab tagging. This is a very brief overview of a lot of work. Above the blue bar is the release period, below is the recovery period. You've got small emblems that show the tech and the approach. And then you've got male-female markers here for the sex of Bristol Bay red king crab that we focused on. So this began back in 19 with the sail drones and the acoustic tags, and we found about 1/3 of these crab. This was really good. It was kind of a remarkably high relocation of the crab after we had put them out. We had about 150 crab that we put tags on, and we found about 50 of those, again in the fall. We did that project again in the middle of July, relocating those crabs the following spring and summer. And during that period, we started to transition to some of our microsatellite tags, which are those emblems on the bottom that kind of look like a half blown up balloon there. But this gives you a quick view from the beginnings of our movement work on Bristol Bay red king crab. And Gordon also noted, and we're interested to see some of the work that's blending this over towards Apelio and to others as well also. We've done most of our work so far for Bristol Bay red king crab on males. So just to give a quick, brief overview, and I'm borrowing this from our NOAA and ADF&G agency partners, but mature males, we get vectors of movement. So basically we know where the crab were released with a tag, and we know where they were recovered with a tag. We also have some background information that is from either the surveys or the fisheries to know where other distributions at other times of the year are. So the bottom two panels here are some of Dr. Zacker's work to digitize logbook data from the commercial fishery. That's where the crabbers fish, down there on the bottom two. You also see the regulatory areas here as a point of reference. So some of the quick things that we know here about our movement work so far. For the fall, the distribution appears to be temperature dependent. There is some consistent directional movement, and movement towards or into the red king crab savings area appears to occur. During the winter, there's some evidence that these crabs turn around, move back east. And then for females, we're still working. Our samples are smaller in relative terms, but the mating and molting grounds in eastern Bristol Bay, both nearshore and offshore, are areas of interest that the crab appear to use. And there is no evidence at this point of females moving back to some of the historical grounds that are more inshore near Unimak Island. Our next steps here are to focus more on female movement. And really this whole thing is about filling some of the seasonal gaps in information. Because we know pieces, we know the summer survey quite well over a long time series from the NOAA work. And we know some of the fishery information quite well, which at times in the past has been punctuated to not a very long period. It's a little bit stretched out since rationalization, but this whole project is really about putting the pieces together to learn about distribution of crab and to fill the gaps in the seasonal information. Moving on to one of our more immediate pieces of research, we have some new crab research that is also pairing objectives, so we have some tagging that is going to be part of this. We're thankful that both the agencies really hustled here very quickly and recently to come up with about $850,000 to support this one directly. We're going to be working directly with them, NOAA and ADF&G here. This would be an intent to be on the water on about March 12 or 13, chartering 2 crab boats. There's quite a few crab boats that are available right now. Our request for proposal is open as I speak. This is focused in Bristol Bay in a core area for the 3 objectives, and those are to measure winter-spring catch per unit effort of Bristol Bay red king crab from pots, to place satellite tags at the density centers of where we find these crab. And then our third objective is important also. It's to conduct some pot gear work to reduce discards. Sometimes the regulatory discards in the directed crab fisheries are relatively high, and anything that we can do to reduce that is pretty important. One key thing here as we've developed this one with some urgency is that these outcomes are expected to be useful soon. The NOAA summer survey is the big, large data chunk that we get to see in this June, July, August period. So everybody always holds our breath for that, but these outcomes that we're working on with this project can potentially play in for some management consideration this fall also. Just a couple of our particulars were some of our tagging work in relative terms to satellite tags has been quite large. This will put out another 175 tags. For those who may not know, these are expensive. There's 2 types. One is a low resolution, one's a high resolution. The lowest cost one is about $1,200. The highest cost one is over $4,000. 3 pot gear types we're going to use. These are modified red king crab pots for the work. And this will be expected to pull about 1,000 to 1,200 pot lifts, which is a very short and very small effort. And this one has no crab retention during a closed season period. In the opening remarks, we were happy to hear Senator Murkowski mention this. With the congressionally determined spending, the CDS money, we took some efforts to work with other industry partners this year, earlier in the year, and we're thankful that almost $3 million is coming from these efforts for collaborative crab industry research. So we want to again say a huge thank you to our political important leaders here, both of our senators from Alaska and the senators from Washington and others that lent into this work and this upcoming money that will be helpful in supporting continued cooperative research for crab. And for those who would like to see this or read it, this is just the news release from Senator Murkowski's office and a little news blurb from December. That is all I have. I'm here all week. I know that there's a number of crab-related posters and presentations, so I'm very interested to track and follow those. I'm open for questions anytime. The crab industry is very interested in surviving through this and collaborating, continue to build relationships with researchers and get new ideas. So if you have questions or want to bug me anytime, please feel free. Thank you.